Hello everyone. So today would be our again the third lecture on the series of conceptual classes, as we talked about Prodigy 45 that we have started. So we were talking about the various traditions of public administration, right? And what exactly is the scope and understanding of public administration, right? And how narrowly we interpret it, and then we think of how can we solve the questions in the examination, and then we probably lose track of what the questions are, and then we blame the UPSC. That is also there. So the logic is that we have to understand that it is not the question per se which is complicated or difficult. It is our understanding which is very narrow, very conservative, and probably we are elementary in our understanding of the subject. Humanities have obviously a big scope, and public administration, obviously, is more of a hybrid subject. So let us start with this. So we are talking about various traditions and how these traditions have influence, how the society and the culture have influence on the way the role of administration was perceived, right, in different societies. But why we are more concerned with the American public administration or the study of American public administration, because a lot of academic and social activities which were taking place in America reflected the sentiments of democracy. And as we know, democracy is a desirable form of political system, right? So the dominance or the hegemony of American public administration is visible throughout the study of public administration, whatever countries we say, right? Except the continental. So we said France and Germany are the classic examples of that. Right? Otherwise, you see Japan, India, many of the Commonwealth countries, UK, USA, all of them, right? All of them somewhere are directly influenced by the American concept of public administration theory as well as practice both, right? Though we talked about PUBAD as social institution, so the practice part obviously will differ in different countries or societies as per their aims and objectives. So that is obviously a evolved concept now. Later, when Fred Riggs talked about ecological approach, fine. So it's very important for us, pertinent for us to first understand what are the isms, what are the ideologies, what are the conceptual terms, the vocabulary which is there in the public administration, especially your unit 1. Unit 1 covers almost 40% of the paper 1 in the examination. You'll be surprised to know. Fine. So we'll talk about those specific concepts, right? And the influence of, you can say, the various scholars, people coming from different backgrounds, how they enrich the vocabulary of public administration. You can say how the cosmos of public administration was shaped by different people, right? And obviously their understanding of the society and political system. Now, let us go simplify the concept first. So when we think of, the political system, fine, I think it is visible. You can zoom it also if you don't, it's not. So when we think of political system, right, the political system primarily deals with power. Now, if we narrowly interpret the political system, we are only talking about the parliament, fine, the executive, and its other institutions, right? Which is not true, because we generally use the word polity. So your paper 2 also, polity, governance, constitution, okay, social justice, whatever, IR. So when we use the word polity, polity is a very loose term for political system, right? The polity has both the aspects. Why we are using the word polity, okay, that you have to understand. So when we say political system, we are referring to all the systems, all the institutions, all the organizations which are involved in the acquisition of power, in the pursuit of power, in the aggregation of power, and then in the use of this power for the betterment of society, or for that matter achieving the goals as decided by them, right, or approved by the society, right? So you can say that polity is a term which reflects, right, not only the system, right, but also its participants. Now, when I'm talking about participants here, I'm not just talking about organizations, but I'm also talking about people. So when I say politicians are corrupt, right, which is a very obviously a judgmental statement which should not be accepted as it is. But when I say that politicians are corrupt, right, I'm not saying political system is corrupt. I'm saying politicians are corrupt. There is no denying the fact that we need political system, right? We cannot totally ignore the importance and the influence of political system in one's life, right? In society in general, that is always there. So when I say people, the participants, the people will come with their associated behaviors. Fine. So aapne bola, let me simplify it for you. So if you said rickshaw wala, right, and a film star, right, and then you say, okay, wo dukan wala, right, what are you referring to? You're not referring to that just as a person. You're referring to the common set of behaviors which are associated with a profession, right? It has a culture of its own. So when I say I am a person living in this house, right, but I am an academician or I'm an engineer, right, I'm a technocrat, right? So when I use the word technocrat or an engineer or a person living here, you associate a whole set of ideas, you attribute a whole set of values to me, right? So when I say polity, it is more concerned with not only the system which is working, but also its participants, the people and their behaviors. And what we do, we somewhere try to understand the impact of the behaviors. It's okay. See the place we are residing, electricity keeps coming and going, and that's a big issue, right? So it's not only, right, you can say the system, but also the people, right? And people, and what is the behavior of people? So people have a formal behavior and an informal behavior. For example, a public servant, a bureaucrat, when he's working in the office, he is not working in the personal capacity. So he might leave a lot of his personal informal behaviors outside the office, and he'll enter the office. And probably the office will also not allow such kind of behaviors to be exhibited, right? So people have both sets of behaviors, formal and informal. The informal is more socio-cultural, right? It's more socio-cultural in nature, whereas formal is more legal and procedural in nature, right? So we have to understand from that aspect. So there is a political system, right? The loose term is polity. It is concerned with power, right? So the upstream systems of the political systems are those who are actually creating the legitimacy, the legal framework, and who are actually providing that authority to the downstream institutions. The downstream institutions may be, let's say we take about parliamentary democracy like India. So parliamentary democracy, okay, obviously talks about the legislature being a key player, a central player in the authorization, approval, decision making, whatever you talk about. Fine. So when the legislature is the key player and the role of the executive depends upon the legitimacy, the approval of the legislature. Fine. So in a parliamentary democracy, right, if we talk about, like for example India, so the legislature, the parliament, right, is the binding force. It is the upstream institution which authorizes or gives the legitimacy. Whereas when we talk about the executive, or for that matter the public administration now, the government system, right? So the downstream institutions like administration and departments, directorates, agencies, regional offices, regional organizations, whatever they are working as a complex system, these downstream institutions basically reflect the action part of the government. That is what we have to do. The upstream institutions more reflect the legitimacy part, the approval part, the authorization part, right? So the behaviors are what? The behaviors are the set of do's and don'ts, the set of virtues, desirable traits that we attribute to an institution. So see, upstream institutions like the legislature, the executive, even for that matter, judiciary, okay, there are predefined values associated with them, probably given by the constitution. The downstream institutions may also be controlled by the constitution. We cannot say that, like for example in India it is so, but the upstream institutions will define the legitimacy of the downstream institutions. Fine. So their behaviors are also shaped by that. So when we say the political system or the polity not only comprised of institutions but also behaviors, that is a very important concept to understand, that why the administration did something, why the law was broken, why corruption took place, why people have, or the bureaucrats have lost sensitivity towards the public, why people are insensitive to this. Fine. So when we talk about polity, we cannot simply ignore the citizens out of this, right? So citizens are very much part of that. They are the participants. They also have a behavior, and see, these behaviors are constantly interacting with each other. They are influencing with each other to bring a net behavior that is visible. That is what we call the culture, political culture, administrative culture. Right? So the moment you say police is corrupt, politicians are corrupt, you are referring to that culture, the popular culture. Fine? The non-legal convention that has developed, fine, in terms of the relationship between the society and its institutions or organizations. Fine. So political system is basically the area of study which dominates the entire focus of the study of public administration. Fine. But in the political system, in a very simple sense, we say that every political system, as per Montesquieu's classification of separation of power, right, or Montesquieu. So Montesquieu's classification of separation of power, we say there is legislature, there is executive, there is judicial. Right? Now this separation of power concept is also essential to the understanding of the role, the what you can say, the entire identity of public administration as an organization associated with the political system. Now if I say, so the executive consists of the administration also. So this is political part, this is official part. Fine. They are recruited, they are selected by an examination where they are elected. Fine. But both are part of the same continuum. Right? Their role is defined by the goals or the policies or the aims of ambitions of the society, which are basically made by them, fine, or maybe implemented by them, or both can participate in that, right? So let us say when we talk about separation of power now, so when we talk about the political system, fine, the constitutional organs which have been created, now this in very legal sense you call as state. Right? But state is not as simple as the government. State is not as simple as the political system. Now the concept of state and the definition of state, right, or the understanding of state started from the Athenian democracy, okay, the Athens, and where we find the concept of city-states emerging. There are a lot of Western philosophers, right, starting from Aristotle, Plato, right, MacIver, MacPage, Machiavelli, right? And there are so many people who have talked about the idea of state in their own conceptions. Mostly they were monarchical states, but we find the emergence of city-states. City-states were small territories which were governed independently, right? So you can say that way, that the concept of city-state or the concept of a limited sovereign state comes from there, right? But yeah, you can say in the modern sense, when we use the word state, it has a legal definition given by the international law. Fine, a defined population, a defined territory, rule of law, sovereignty. Inter alia being the features of a state. But to understand it conceptually, let us say state is what? State is the manifestation of the entire political power of the society. For example, family is the manifestation of the emotions, right? The biological relationships. So when we are referring to family, we automatically imply certain things. When we are referring to economic system, market, we imply certain things. When we are referring to the state, we instantly imply that it is the symbol or manifestation of the political system, political power in the society. So state may comprise of these things, right? Comprise of this and so many other aspects. Fine. The entire state will include the entire political system, the citizens, the institutions, everything. But let's say narrowly, let us interpret it. So we have these three organs. Now, where is this? This is a part of executive, right? So when we talk about separation of power of Montesquieu, right, the power is separated between three organs. Okay, there is a reason for that. That is known as pluralism, right? Or the pluralism, institutional pluralism, that the power must not be centralized in any of them. The idea of checks and balances coming from the American concept of political system. So it has to be divided. Why it has to be divided? Because none of them should become powerful, right? And there can be a peer-to-peer control. There can be a horizontal check and balance between them, right? So you can understand, if I give some part of power here, some part of power to this will represent the entire power of the society or the state, right? But a part of this power would be needed by them also. So what will happen? Simply, they will give them through a process of delegation. And delegation is an administrative procedure by which a higher institution provides a part of its power to the lower institutions in a temporary manner to do certain things. That means the overall control of this resides under this. Now, that is the entire idea of the study of public administration, that it is part of political system. So you can understand that with the political science used to study this, the executive, the policy formulation, the lawmaking, everything is part of political system or political science that we are studying, right? So what is technically the awqat of administration? Nothing. When you compare this to them, right? When you think of this versus them, what is it? Nothing. It is just a dependent system. That is what we perceive, right? It is a very small system which will do what has been told, which will implement what has been made, okay, which will do and not decide, right? And that was the reason that there was no specific focus on the study of public administration. It was supposed to be an adjunct, right? An addendum, an allied activity to the political system. So whatever political system, lawmaking, policy making, okay, approvals, debates, motion, resolutions, statutory enactments, okay, whatever we talk about, right? Bills, and likewise, budgetary process, everything was considered to be central to the operation of society, and this was merely treated as a tool, as an instrument to which whatever we'll ask to do, we'll do it. Now that was the initial reason that why there could not be a separate focus on the study of public administration, right? But thanks to people like von Steen, we talked about Wilson, Woodrow Wilson, right? Saint Simon, there are so many people, right? And the French philosophers, the German philosophers, who have extensively thought about the idea that no, administration is central to the governing of society, right? Having a political system, but it's not functioning the way we want it, fine? It's not efficient as we desire it. So obviously, where this failure can be attributed to, it cannot be attributed to, let's say, this, right? These are more or less representative institutions, except judiciary. Yeah, you can leave out. So this or most of the failures of the government's decisions may reside or attributed to this. So a growing focus emerged on the study of administration. Okay, movement for civil services reforms in America around 1880s. You know, the spoil system was there, and spoil system. In fact, many countries of the world, there were such kind of systems where merit system or merit was ignored, right? So there was a spoil system, and reforms were initiated to overcome this spoil system. Whether you talk about Wilson's contribution, right, or even prior to that, the Pendleton Act 1883, right? So let me. So the Pendleton Act 1883 was one of the first major legislations challenging the spoils system in US, right? So from there on, you can say formally the study of administration would have started, right? And then let us say over the time, yeah, they realized that administrative autonomy and a minimum amount of authority to the administration is very crucial to its performance. Fine. So let us say this idea that the administration does not constitute the major or one of the direct organs of the state. Okay, this conception is highly dominated in the Anglophone tradition that we talked about in the previous class, right? But when we think of the Francophone tradition, it was not considered that way, right? Now let us come back to that important concept. So when you go to the Francophone tradition, right, let us say roughly the Napoleonic codes that developed, okay, specific focus on the administrative laws. We'll study over the time, we'll know what it is, right? And specific focus on providing administration an organic place, okay, under the state. So let us say roughly, if you talk about Francophone tradition, right, they would treat administration as the fourth organ of the state, directly deriving its power from the constitution, or at least providing strong laws, civil services law, so that they acquire an autonomous authority and identity compared to these three, right? So the logic is that that is their conception, where administration is given a unique identity, a separate identity, virtually considering the administration's role to the crucial to the existence of society, and the dangers of politicization, the dangers of influence and all those things will be reduced. We are seeing what is happening. So Delhi government is blaming the central government is blaming the Delhi government, then the Kerala government is doing something, then the West Bengal government. Now what is this? This is obviously the lack of clarity when we talk about the political institutions, right? The lack of clarity in terms of power sharing, even though we are a federal system, right? Or maybe a quasi-federal system, right? So there is lack of clarity when we think of political systems. Political systems operate on populism, popular mandate, public will, like Wilson uses the term multitudinous monarch. So the multitudinous monarch, that is the public opinion, the multiple heads and power centers. It's the society which has the power centers, communities, diversities. They have their own influence. They're working like pressure groups. So the idea of the Francophone tradition was that if the political systems are politicized, fine, they are dominated by populism, and probably they have no clear-cut mandate in terms of their actions, their behavior, right? Even though legally things are written, but they don't follow those norms under the excuse or pretext of the public opinion. So they wanted to protect the administration from that, right? But when we come to the Anglophone tradition, fine, this situation changes and they become technically the part of executive. Not technically, they are actually controlled by this, right? Now a direct control, institutional control of executive on administration. accountability and responsibility of administration to executive. This is a very narrow accountability here. Now it is increasing, no doubt. Judiciary has a very important role to play. But when we think of the lack of direct accountability, means that they do not report to the judges. The judges don't write their ACRs, their performance reports. Fine. So they are not directly answering to them. They are not directly answering to them. They are doing it so through them. Maybe through them. Fine. Or maybe through them. That is what they are doing. So here what happens? They basically derive their sustenance, their existence from the executive. So you can imagine they become highly politicized, even though it should not happen, but it happens. Now that is the behavior part we were talking about, right? So legally, the power is given, it may be divided, fine. There may be a vertical division of power, or delegation of power, not division, between them and them, fine. In terms of constitution, like example for India, we have part 14, right? Article 308 to 315 dealing with the civil services, right? So that may be one legal aspect, that the public administration is independent and it has constitutionally been given the authority and it should approve, right? It should work that way. But the logic is, it is not true. The behavior part, the culture part influences it every day, right? So they have the tendency of getting politicized. Now, when we talk about the American public administration, that is, it is a democracy. Indian public administration, democracy. So many of, we generalize most of the democracies, parliamentary democracies or presidential democracies, whatever. The democracies have obviously a specific attribute of going under the mandate of the people, the public opinion. The majority basically dominates. Huh? Majority may not be referring to any culture or any religion. Majority here is referring to the mass, the numbers, which is basically, a system of numbers, nothing else. Right? It is subject upon to the numerical majority. That is what happens. Fine. So here you can say the public administration in this tradition is susceptible to getting politicized. But yes, we prefer that. We prefer popular control over administration. We prefer the sovereignty of the state over administration. We prefer the dominance of the political system over the administration, even though it is also part of political system. Fine. But let us say, so when we talk about the study of public administration now, for our UPSC or syllabus that we see, our entire orientation of questions that may be there, right? They all reflect this aspect, that administration is subject to political control, popular control. Now, when we think of the American democracy and the formation of American Constitution, the Philadelphia Convention, fine. So there also we'll find how the American Constitution was shaped in its value system, right? Where we find a whole lot of debate between the various people, Marbury, right? The Madison, the architects of the American Constitution, Madison basically, okay, Jefferson, and all those people who basically shaped the American Constitution. So when you think of Jefferson, Madison, okay, and likewise the people who came, the political philosophers and the politicians and the authors of the American Constitution. So we'll talk about in detail over the time. So what they had a perception, there was a debate, there was a conflict between that whether the political system must control the administration or administration must be powerful enough to pursue its goal independently of the political system. So America settled for the former. The political system must control the administration because they believed it's better to have political control than have political stability or performance or efficiency, right? So you'll say America had a culture of administrative constraint. The culture of administrative constraint means that America was, or American administration was supposed to be controlled, to be regulated by the political system, and it was considered desirable, it was considered to be a virtue, fine, rather than something which is despised, like for example today. So it was believed that way, that politicization may be a way of life of American administration, right? So the culture of administrative constraint is the background in which the study of public administration evolves in America, right? And why we are talking about all this, because there's a very important concept in which you'll find number of 10 markers in your paper 1 part A, right? Or maybe 20 markers question which talk about, you know, the comparative role of the societies, their culture in shaping the orientation and the evolution of public administration. Point where you talk about the dominance of political system in American administration, okay, or where you talk about the secondary treatment given to American administration or administration in the American political theory, right? But Wilson was the person who comes as a rescuer, as a savior of public administration, and he says that no, we need to have a separate study. Though it was not only Wilson. Fine. There are a lot of people prior to him who talked about this idea, right? But you cannot attribute the emergence or the evolution of public administration to them. So Wilson, Frank Goodenough was another person. L.D. White was also a person in the same tradition, right? And like when you talk about Frank Parkin's understanding analysis, he says that it was not just Wilson's idea of administration as separate activity from the political system. It was also Wilson's philosophy of imagining the administration as the carrier or the, you know, the repository of the public sentiments, of the social values rather than the politics. So he talks about politics as mean machine. Politics is more of, you know, the self-interest, whereas administration is more of selfless interest, right? So we have to understand the philosophy of Wilson rather than just the specific aspects of Wilson that he talked about. Rather than attributing just the dichotomy to Wilson and later criticizing it, we have to understand that Wilson's perception of public administration was totally built on his idea of reform, the reforming the society, and administration being crucial leader in the area of social and you can say economic reform within the society. So Wilson was more of reformist. He was visionary, right? He was experimental. He borrowed a lot of knowledge from the Francophone tradition, put it into the Anglophone tradition, right? And that is why he was also supposed to be a comparativist, that we say, right? Though he was not totally a comparative theorist, but he was a comparativist, right? He had a democratic conservatism. He even though he believed that administrative autonomy is important, but he nowhere outrightly denies the role of political control over administration. So there were elements of democratic conservatism, there were elements of experimentism or experimentation, there were elements of comparison, there were elements of reform, okay, there were elements of, you know, a wider role to be played by the administration. So you cannot say that Wilson was not socially conscious. Wilson did not understand the power imbalance between the politics and administration. Fine. In fact, he wanted administration to have separate legality and identity along with authority, okay, which lets many critics and the theorists question Wilson's supposition of, you know, dichotomy or so-called dichotomy. He never used the term himself, because if the administration is treated that way, then it virtually becomes the fourth branch of the government. If it becomes fourth branch of the government, it undermines the entire vision of a democratic political system, right? So we'll start, or we'll continue this idea, okay, tomorrow or maybe the next lecture when we start off. Fine, taking up obviously a whole lot of concepts. Right now also we are, you can say, technically strapped in terms of resources, but we are trying to do whatever we can. And so over the time, bit by bit, we are going to add up, okay, more aesthetics to whatever we are doing. Fine. Thank you so much for being with us, and keep learning, be safe, and obviously the lockdown is not going to stop the learning. Okay, it's a physical lockdown, not a mental lockdown. Fine. So there are barrier-free studies. Fine. Technology has eliminated the barriers of geography that you know. So geography is more of history now in terms of technology. So it doesn't matter wherever we are, whatever we are doing, we will reach out to you. And that is what Prodigy is about. Thank you so much for your time. Take care.